You might have heard that running an Airbnb is an easy way to get into real estate and bring in more money. But running an Airbnb does have its challenges, and it's quite different operating a short-term rental versus a long-term rental property. So that's why in this video, I'm gonna be giving you guys the honest truth about owning an Airbnb by sharing our journey with furnished rental properties, the pros and cons of running a furnished rental, and the real life lessons that we've learned along the way. By the end of this video, I'm also gonna reveal how much we made in our first year to see if it's even worth it in the first place. My name is Sean and I make real estate easy. And for almost 2 years now, we've been renting out a primary home in the Bay Area as a fully furnished rental on Airbnb, VRBO, and Furnished Finder. But before we get started, I want to give you some background of my investing journey. My wife and I are full-time real estate investors with 34 units in our portfolio, and we don't have any partners because we like to live a very simple life where we don't have to answer to anyone except for ourselves. And the reason why we started renting out my old primary home as a fully furnished rental is because properties in the Bay Area typically don't work that well as traditional rentals. When we rent out a property, we typically want to aim for the 1% rule, meaning that the rent that the property brings in should be at least 1% of the property's purchase price. So if I bought a property for $100,000, then it should rent for at least $1,000. And in most cases, we were hitting those metrics for our out-of-state rental properties. But in the Bay Area, you can buy a property for $1 million, only rent it out for $3,000. So that's not the 1% rule, that's like the 0.3% rule. So we wanted to maximize our returns while still keeping our property. And I'm a big fan of holding onto Bay Area real estate. I believe in that market and I think it's gonna continue to appreciate. So I definitely didn't want to sell my home in the Bay Area, but I also didn't want to just rent it out for 12 months at a time. Now, renting it out as a short-term rental seemed like a more flexible option. We could make more money on the rents, and we could actually make our property look nicer and write off these expenses because they're now rental property expenses. We gave our home a fresh coat of paint, brought in much nicer furniture than before, cleaned out all the junk in my home, and took some amazing photos, listed it, and were pleasantly surprised to get a booking almost immediately on our home. Now, a big challenge that we faced with our property in the Bay Area was that our city actually does not allow short-term rentals, meaning you cannot rent your property out for under 31 days at a time. So to get around this rule, we actually rent out our home for at least 1 month at a time. So this really caters to working professionals like interns or people who are moving into the area for work, or even large corporations who need to move a team to an area to work on one specific project. Overall, it's been a very rewarding experience. The guests that we've hosted, for the most part, have been very respectful of our property, and they've all been very kind. So it's also really nice to have one guest stay in your property for many months at a time, so you don't have to worry about getting a turn, getting the cleaners to come in, and you also don't have to worry too much about maintaining the home because guests usually don't complain after they've settled in for a while. Now, one of the big benefits of having a furnished rental, when we moved to Texas, we only had to bring our clothes and our computers with us, leaving all the big furniture behind, such as the beds and the couches. And because I bought it when it was my primary property, I was still able to keep my low rate interest mortgage on it. So now that you heard a little bit about our story, let's talk about the pros and cons about running a fully furnished rental business. One big pro is that you're gonna be making almost 2 times the amount that you normally would make by renting the property out long term. It's also a lot more flexible because you're not limited to renting out property for 12 months at a time to any one tenant. So that usually means that your home won't be so worn down, because I find that guests who live in your home for a month at a time tend to treat your property nicer than guests who only stay at your property for a few nights at a time, or tenants who live in your property for years and years at a time. So you're kind of in that weird mix in the middle of people who don't really care about your property at all and people who have lived in a home for so much that they get really comfortable and just let everything go. Another benefit is that you tend to deal with nicer properties in general. My home in the Bay Area and another home in Texas that we recently put up on Airbnb are homes that we were able to renovate and upgrade and are worth a lot more than the typical properties in our rental portfolio. And because of that, you just have a higher pride of ownership from owning these nicer looking properties. These are homes that you can gladly show off to your friends and family. You also tend to deal with guests who are usually from a nicer tenant base. This means that you don't have to worry about them being late for rent or playing the professional tenant game where they just don't pay and make you wait months before being able to get evicted. And it's also cool to talk to some of our guests and hear the stories and ask them questions like, hey, why are you renting our home for months at a time? Where are you coming from? You can ask what their interests are, and it's nice hearing the compliments about our home when they had a good stay. And I guess it's also a little bit more glamorous because I get to renovate a home and make it look really nice, but instead of flipping it and selling it and being done with the property, I get to hold on to it and make more money while continuing to build equity on the property. By holding on to the assets instead of selling them, we are able to grow our net worth way more over time. Now, the downside of running a short-term rental is that it is way more management intensive. I have to speak to guests all the time. You also have to pay extra attention when a new guest comes in and make sure you give them access to the home via the smart lock systems. I have to make sure that the cleaners do a good job every turn, and I get a little bit anxious that a guest may have a bad first impression when they first walk into the home. And since you can't take away that first experience, we try to make sure that it's perfect the first time they come in. And if there are any issues with the home, we have to hire a handyman and coordinate all of the work while being 2,000 miles away in a different state. So luckily right now, my parents and my wife's parents live relatively close to the home and are very familiar with the property. So if anything happens, they can go to the home and help us deal with any issues. And this has worked for us so far, but without their help, it would have been really rough. Now, it's also bad when you have large gaps in the schedule and strict city ordinances. For example, we had one person who left in early April, and their next booking wasn't until early May. And because we have a 31-day minimum, we weren't able to cover that gap in between. So we basically had our property sitting empty for almost a whole month because no one was able to go in and book during that time frame. Now, another thing is that you're also really reliant on the platform's review system to get more bookings. Sometimes guests can just write reviews that are completely untrue because they may be spiteful individuals and the platforms can't do anything about it because of their policies. Now, couple that with the fact that we only get at most 1 turn per month, so the reviews we have are very few compared to if you're able to run out your property on a daily basis. So every single review matters to us, and it hurts us a lot more if it's a bad review. As I mentioned in another video, we did get one bad review one time because the guest was just making up crazy lies, and it took us many months for us to finally get rid of it. But since then, we've had all 5-star reviews so far, so we're very happy with our property and glad that our guests have a good time there. Whereas with a long-term rental, any complaints with the property is just between you and your tenant. You know, if they don't like their experience, they can move out and no one's gonna know better that they didn't like your home. Another disadvantage of running a fully furnished rental is that local regulations change all the time. So for our latest project in Dallas, we planned on renting it out as a short-term rental, but right when we were about to put on the market, the city council announced a ban across the board for everybody. So this is gonna make a huge change in the market, and we're gonna see how it goes from there. And finally, because you are a service-based business, you need to make sure that everyone is as happy as possible. And every guest is different. Like, you might have 9 great guests and one really bad one that trashes your new home and makes your brand new property look really disgusting. So now that I've shared my journey with you and the pros and cons of running a furnished rental business, let's talk about how much we made last year. We priced our listing at around $189 a night, which we think is pretty fair because if you think about renting a hotel room in the Bay Area, you're probably paying around the same price anyway. But hotel room doesn't give you super fast Wi-Fi, a whole parking spot to yourself. You don't get 3 bedrooms, a living room, kitchen, a backyard. And in general, having a home is nicer than living in a small hotel space. What you usually get in a hotel is a 300 square foot room, 1 bed, maybe a refrigerator that's super loud at night, 1 TV, and spotty internet connection. So I think that if you're a traveling professional, you would much rather stay in a home with an actual nice bed than a hotel room for the same price. And so we ended up having 6 guests stay at our property in 2022. And again, most of our guests were amazing. And the downside is we did have some gaps in our schedule. And because of these gaps, we weren't able to make as much money as we could have if we just rented out 100% of the time. But we still ended up making around $50,000 in gross rents, which is pretty insane if you think about it. Like, if I rented out the home full time, I maybe would have made around $36,000. So renting out our home this way was enough to cover the payments for our home in the Bay Area, plus our property here in Dallas. And this is $50,000 after paying for all the Airbnb service fees. Now, it also just so happened that this year, all of our bookings happened to come from Airbnb, and we only started getting listings on VRBO starting the following year. Now, this $50,000 doesn't include the amount that we had to pay our cleaners, which ended up being around $1,800. Now, during this time, we also spent a decent amount of money on repairs. We took the opportunity to fix up some cracks in the drywall, we did some foundation work, and we added a new air conditioning system to the home. But the thing is, by doing these repairs now, we're improving the property, we're building up equity for it, and the best part is because we're renting it, we're able to write off most of these expenses. So my top tip for people who are considering starting their Airbnb business is to make the property as nice as you can. Clean it up, furnish it so that it looks presentable without breaking the bank, take super nice photos, and make your listing look as good as possible. And also read up on your local ordinances and stay compliant with those laws. I also recommend talking to your neighbors and letting them know that you're going to be renting out your place as a fully furnished rental, so that if they have any issues, they can call you directly instead of going to the cops when they have a complaint. You also want to be super reasonable when it comes to talking to your guests to make sure they're having a good time. If there's ever any issue, try to fix it as soon as possible. So was it worth it to host my property on Airbnb? Absolutely. We absolutely enjoy renovating homes, but we hated how we had to sell them off in order to make a profit. So now we get to update homes and keep them in our portfolio while getting massive cash flow from the properties. The extra management is a bit annoying, but it's making us better, and we're learning how to fix all of small repairs. It's actually pretty therapeutic to work on home projects, and it's made me quite the handyman, and we plan on continuing this strategy going forward. So we're excited to continue sharing our latest projects on this channel. If you guys plan on renting your property out on Airbnb, you can sign up to be a host using the link down in the description below. And if you're thinking of doing what we did by moving out and converting your primary home into a rental, then be sure to check out this video about how to turn your primary into a rental property. I'll be going through all the steps that you need to do to have the smoothest transition. So thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you next time. Take care.